reasoning more than we used to do previously. Reasoning that there might be some long-term costs that we're not able to see, and that reasoning a bit more might be beneficial to the long-term functioning of the system is beneficial. And I'm making that case here with my theory, that as we're not evolutionarily developed to see the long-term costs and the benefit, we are biased toward seeking for the short-term benefit. The episode of today is basically a theory I've got. It's called the theory of the origin of all the vices and virtues. And I will be giving an explanation. I'm with Emilio today.
Hello.
And he will be talking with me about my theory. And he will be giving some reasons why he agrees or he doesn't agree with it. So yep, I will start explaining it. So my theory starts with the basic point that everything is biased by the fact that we are not capable of seeing things as clearly depending on the complexity of these things. If something has some consequences in the long term, you are not as capable of seeing the costs or the benefit as if it was in the short term. So if there's something, for example, which has a cost in the short term, like going to the gym or modifying your diet so you start eating something which is more healthy, that thing tends to have a more tangible cost to yourself in the short term and an intangible benefit in the long term. For the best of my knowledge, I've never seen anyone talking about this theory giving it the exact same words. I'm not saying that this theory is original from me. It's probably already invented by someone else. The basic points I've read, this theory is not invented by me. It's just an interpretation of how things I've seen in my life turned out to be. And all the different books I've read, all the different experiences I've had, everything ends up being the same thing. It's two things, and it has to do with the tangible and the intangible part of the equation or the situation you are facing in that situation. So one other example would be when you are a drug addict, you tend to be more capable to see the benefit than the cost, because the benefit is instantaneous and the cost is in the long term. The cost is not tangibly seen because that's almost irrelevant. The fact that you take one more dose of the drug, it's not going to create a tangible cost or even a measurable cost. Even if you had the most precise measurement system, like the most, how do you call a thing you use to measure something? Like a tool? Unit. Yeah, in case you were able to focus in the units and see it precisely, like in, let's say, if someone that has smoked tobacco for like 40 years straight, 20 cigarettes a day for 40 years, the unit of damage, it's 1 million. So if you smoke for 1 day, it's probably like in 10,000. It's like super low in comparison to or even lower, because the damage is not linear. It tends to, you are more capable of seeing that someone has smoked 1 cigarette than to discriminate between 9,999 and the 10,000. So the fact that you are more capable of distinguishing those might signal that not every single cigarette causes the same damage. It's also true that if you smoke only 1 cigarette, the increase of the odds of you getting cancer might have increased more than they might have increased in case you smoked 1 more, parting from 9,999. But so the basic point is that the cost is not, you are not able to rationalize about the cost, but you are more than capable of rationalizing, but maybe not rationalize, but you are more than capable of feeling the benefit of killing the thrill you have for the next dose of the drug you are consuming. So, and one point of view I have that is super controversial, I guess, it's that this also applies to economics and the public spending. In terms of, if I'm part of a sector and I'm able to lobby the government so I get some funds for my cause, I will be able to get more resources for it. but I will not be objective in the moment of judging if the fact of giving more funds to my cause is objectively positive or not. I'm not going to be objective doing the judgment, and I'm just going to say I need more funds because I will invent whatever it's needed, but more people demand funds than the actual requirement of the economy for those funds. The optimal distribution of the funds will probably not be, if everyone who demanded the funds will be given the funds, the economy will be a ruin. So that thing makes me think that people tend to over demand funds and they produce the benefit. If you could just not give me nothing, but you would get from me like 1,000 euros, you exploit that interaction the most you could. But the fact that you cannot do that because coercion is not permitted makes you not be able to do that, and you have to satisfy my needs in order for me to give you the 1,000 euros. So the government is an entity that is capable of taking the funds coercively out of the population. That's an objective truth. I'm not getting into if this kind of coercion is legitimate or not. That could be another reason. I think that some government is required, so I'm not saying that it's not legitimate. I'm just saying that it's money earned coercively. And the fact that it's coercively earned makes me think that those funds might not be used in the most efficient way in the future, as the alternative would be like in the market, for example. So when you are demanding for the funds, you are saying that your cause is the most relevant one. And when you are using those funds, if you got those funds assuming a low cost, like a message to the government telling them, hey, excuse me, I need some funds for my cause. I've got so many people helping me. Here's my letter of requirement with 1,000 signs of another 1,000 people who are supporting this cause. The odds of you getting the funds are bigger than if you just send them your card with your sign. So the fact that you are not assuming the cost of whatever you are getting, that you are capable of getting 1,000 euros without having to deal with the cost of producing the thing that the person is valuing, makes me think, and I could reason for it, that the incentives there are perverse in terms of you don't see the cost because the cost is intangibly distributed among all the taxpayers, but you see the benefit in terms of your sector is benefited by all the money, all the public funds that are going to your sector, and that's good for you. It's tangibly good. It's tangibly measured, just the good part, but the bad part, which is that those funds are not being invested in some other parts of the economy, which the government might be able to invest in efficiently. But if those funds were not invested by the government, the taxpayers would have them in their pockets still, and I think that that's more optimal, but that's another case. This has also to do with the fact of having more skin in the game than less, because in the moment you reduce the skin in the game, those perverse incentives end up appearing. So my theory also applies to the moment in which you are getting funds from the government, because you are more than incentivized to demand for funds, and you are not as incentivized to give in exchange something which is valued by society. Have you seen any case of any of the examples I've given in which my theory applies in your life? Or
Yeah, one could be practical in how everybody sees the short-term benefits of things without calculating the long-term effects that it could cause and the investment in relationship that it could necessitate. So it's natural for young people to be in love and want to have sex together, but that's going to come with a lifelong cause to the effect of the work that they're doing together. And
you mean the exposure to diseases, or?
No, even bringing children into the world.
Oh yeah.
And maybe with diseases, but more so the effectual tool of sex is to create children. So to get into that, you can try with all the technology you want to try to limit that and stop that, but there's still very small percentages or situations that happen where that will and could happen. And so maybe in the moment, in the situation, it seems very quickly beneficial, but you're not considering the long-term situational responsibilities connected with such an act. And so not connecting the responsibilities of the consequences of the tool that you're using and what its purpose is, and its nature, and looking to change it for a short-term benefit is to manipulate the tool for your own purposes and for your own pleasures in that moment, but reject it for its nature and its consequences that it's designed to create, right? And so people do that naturally, and they redefine maybe what sex is or relationships are in order to fit their short-term benefit versus the natural design for long-term responsibility. If that makes sense. And so they change their value system at the nature in order to, like what you're saying, it literally redefines reality, redefines identity, redefines everything in order to get the short-term benefit and reject the possible long-term consequences of it.
But this would be a successful management of the situation.
Successful management.
Yeah, because if you are capable of avoiding, I'm not saying that it's moral or it should be done, but from the economic calculus of the person doing it, he's seeing that he could have a short-term benefit by having the sex, having the pleasure of the moment, and avoid the long-term cost. That means having to deal with maybe the exposure to diseases, having the kids, having to take care of them, all those costs. So they are, in practical terms, they are capable of avoiding those costs.
But I would say that the tool, I mean, unless you get down to a neurological level and you take some pill to try to stop neurological sensations, the very tool of sex is to unite two people in a neurological way and to bring them together on an emotional way. And I would say spiritual as well, add that to it. But so to do that is super dangerous for two people to do in a relationship situation, which if you're binding two people together, now, if you're for the short-term benefits, but you're doing a long-term work, that could be dangerous. You're committing to something emotionally that you're not ready to commit to, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a long-term binding tools happening for long-term effects, but we're not ready because we just want the quick satisfaction of it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you can limit the diseases in the babies through technology, but you're not limiting the effectual work of the tool and its nature to do its work to bind two people together on a deeper interpersonal level.
Okay, so there might still be some long-term cause, which is the fact that if you are doing the, like you talked about in the last podcast, those quick fixes in Tinder, for example,
sure.
like the hookup culture in the Western.
Sure.
If you're using that in the short term, and in the long term, you will see yourself in the long term without having that super values thing you are talking about. That is a spiritual connection with the other person.
Even mechanical connection. I mean, it's a binding, neurological binding of the two coming together. It creates literal neural pathways of binding two together as one, which is powerful biologically. Spiritually, it's a whole other level on top of that, I would say. But even if you remove the spiritual aspect, biologically, emotionally, and psychologically, there's a deep work happening between the two.
Oh yeah, I agree. There's some benefit to avoiding that and doing it the traditional way, because I think that I'm not advocating for one or the other. I'm just trying to analyze it objectively.
Sure.
I'm seeing your theory, and it makes all the sense of the world, because we might be able to avoid some costs in the short term, but we're not capable of avoiding all the costs, as you are saying, because you are saying, hey, be wary. There might still be some cost in long term, which you haven't developed a theory, technology to avoid those. And the fact that those might exist might make you want to be more careful with the things you are doing, because you are not going to get those benefits that you are only going to get if you are capable of dealing with a short-term cost. Because if you increase in your theory, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that if you assume some more cost in the short term, like doing it the traditional way and having the kids, the predisposition to building that spiritual and biological binding is much bigger than if you did it the modern way. So as Nassim Taleb says, if you don't know the specific characteristics of a system, you shouldn't change the system. If you don't know what the consequences of your acts are, you shouldn't be changing them.
Isn't that it's kind of interesting though, like what you're talking about, how you become addicted to it, right? Because obviously it feels great in the short-term benefit.
Yeah.
And then what's even stranger though is how you're so devoted to your short-term benefits of it, and the long-term is so intangible, like you've said with that word, it's so intangible, the long-term results, that you literally start to view reality in a new way, because you're so focused on receiving the short-term benefits the way that you desire it, that you will morph your identity, you'll morph your vision and view of your reality, you'll morph how you interpret information in order to bias yourself to be more free to receive the short term. And so it's a big draw. If you're receiving short-term benefits from some things, to watch out, because it's probably warping your view of reality, of truth, because you're so devoted to getting what you have so desired.
I think
short term,
the origin for these inefficiencies that are being created, according to you, is that biologically, the short-term benefit of having sex, it has been proven that giving people orgasms, or like the short-term benefit that young people or like people in general are seeking to have without assuming the long-term costs, have a huge effect on the effectivity of people having more kids. If it wasn't because of that short-term benefit, people wouldn't be able to see the long-term benefit of the existence of the kids and their deeper relationship. There wouldn't be sufficient production of kids if that short-term benefit wouldn't exist. Mm-hmm. So nature, doing whatever it has done to end up developing this system.
It gifts them. It gives a positive stimulus to a positive action that it foresees.
And what would you attribute the incapability of nature to adapt to our new environment? We've been able to modify it in order to have some technologies to get the short-term benefit, but nature hasn't been able to react to that and be like, oh, you've developed something to avoid having the long-term benefit, so I'm going to take the short-term benefit out of the equation, because the only reason for having the short-term benefit was that you were going to have the long-term cost or the long-term benefit.
I mean, there's all kinds of things that you could try to say in Western developed nations, like looking at just pure data or something like that. But even, and who knows? I personally don't know the cause and effect of it. But even within the last couple generations, just even the sperm cell count of men has drastically been reduced.
Wow, I've recently heard a podcast of a girl. She's got a book called Countdown, and she talked about all the different toxicities that are inside of her current life that are influencing our endocrine system.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing that's making men in general have a much lower testosterone levels, some much lower testosterone levels than in the past. And also
so that's environment with personal choices all mixed together. I'm not saying that they have a link or a connection to it, but even just in biological ways, there are changes in the reproductive world in the last couple centuries.
Oh, it could be also true that it's not only those substances that the girl that I could name it. Here it is. Countdown. How our modern world is threatening sperm counts, altering male and female reproductive development, and imperiling the future of human race.
There you go.
So the book is by Shanna Swan. How do you pronounce this? Shanna Swan. Swan. Oh yeah. So yeah, this was the book. I haven't had time to read it, but I got the book. Yes, so I added it to my list, wish list.
Sure, definitely.
And it makes the exact same point you were doing, that it's actually true what you were saying, that the sperm count has gone down, the testosterone levels have also gone down, and you're right. And it might not only have to do with the biological stuff that we are surrounding ourselves with, that we might not have been surrounded by in the past, and it might have something to do with our actual customs that we are developing right now. Like the fact of having access to that short-term sexual satisfaction might be leading to some reduction in the willingness to have long-term seeking for sex.
Yeah, and I know it's always a pessimistic view to things, but a lot of times I would say that when you're using the word like nature or guiding the process, or nature will find a way through this, it's not always towards a positive result. nature also leads to death. So things that are going on, development of technology or people or situations or cultures, it's not always going towards a positive result. It can also go towards a very negative result that leads to death. And so that's always a necessary option to have, is to see that the things that are being developed, the future progression that we're going on, it doesn't mean that it's going in a positive way. We're seeing changes happen, but it can also lead to a very negative way, which leads ultimately to death.
Oh yeah, there might be some kind of long-term catastrophic risk we are exposing ourselves to, which gives a short-term benefit. Mm-hmm. Like the banks giving loans in the 2007.
Yeah, it works great for the people that are enjoying the benefits of it for a certain generation.
In the short term.
And then, but if you have that big world perspective, that long timeline perspective, you can see how that immaturity and foolishness led to a real disaster in maybe the future generations.
Even thinking that we are getting some big benefits in the short term, we might be exposing ourselves to a huge black swan in the future.
And it's really cool because I talk to my boys, me and them talk every night, and we read and we pray together and we talk. And I talk to them a lot about like things that aren't good for us. They feel really great. And so it's not like things that work well and things that are utilitarian equal good. No, there's lots of things that work well, and maybe it will work well as we're viewing it for a whole season, for a whole life. But that doesn't mean that in its nature, it's a good thing. True good things, I would say, are good eternally. They will always be good, and they will always produce good things. It's very difficult, because what is good, and because something that works, utilitarianism, isn't always good, even though it works really well for what we perceive it to be. But for the long term, that's why we need a greater perspective to know what's truly good, because we can say things are good because it works for me, but that doesn't mean it's good in its nature.
Yeah. So I think that his argument has a lot to do with the way Nassim describes evolution, which not evolution, but the way things evolve to be more efficient. He said that things worked via negativa. It means that things happen with random mutations, and then the ones that are shown to be negative are weeded out. But we don't actually have a will towards choosing the correct things, or not as much as we might think. Most of the things that happen, if you ascribe to this theory, you will end up thinking that more things than people tend to think of are modified or influenced by facts in a relevant way, which you are not aware of. And this also applies to the self-fulfilling prophecy theory, which says that even if you are not capable of modifying your environment as much as you would want to, the fact of you believing that you are capable will make you be more willing to do take some actions that will end up modifying your environment more than if you thought you weren't able to do it. So yeah, there's like a misalignment between our actions and our long-term or infinite-term benefits. We only see the short-term ones because those are tangible, mm-hmm. But the long-term are super hard to see. And mm-hmm. I read one of the definitions of wisdom, which I agree with, and it's the capability of seeing the long-term costs of your actions. That's what wisdom is defined. That's how wisdom is defined by this definition. And I really agree with it, because I think that if you're capable of seeing the long-term or infinite-term effects or consequences of your actions, that's ultimately the thing that you need in order to be able to choose things properly. And if wisdom doesn't have a correlation between doing things correctly, I don't know what wisdom is for.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I think that our incapability to see the long-term costs has a lot to do with the fact that if you see the past in the world, we weren't expected to think about the complex topics we are now supposed to be thinking of, like the economy. The economy is a super complex topic. People tend to believe in socialism or in like government intervention policies because they see the tangible benefit, but the intangible cost is bigger, as all the libertarians would argue. This case parts from the point that seeing the benefit in the short term is super easy. Everyone is able to see that. but seeing how expropriating the private property out of the capitalists, the people who own the property, the means of production, has a short-term benefit. So you are able to redistribute all that wealth and invest it in whatever way you want, but you are not capable. You only have the force to do it, but you don't have the wisdom to say, oh, wait a moment, if these guys were the ones holding the wealth, if they didn't get it unfairly from the market or like coercively from someone, the odds are that these people are capable of handling the wealth, because in the long term, if they are not capable of handling it, they will lose it. Mm-hmm. So the fact of you with violence taking the wealth from someone and spending it will make people super happy in the short term. Like, for example, it happened in Venezuela in the start of the dictatorship. Everyone was super happy in the first moment. It was like consuming the previous savings. That's easy to do. Everyone can do that. But the fact of seeing that those people might be capable of handling their net worth in a better way than you are needs you to be humble. And that's not easy to develop. I think that humility requires some kind of wisdom. Mm-hmm. And in order to get into being humble, you need being capable of to reason about some complex topics that naturally you are not predisposed to, because we haven't been evolved or created towards. I support the evolution theory, but in case like whatever, like the fact is that, like, for example, 300 years ago, people weren't supposed or expected or exposed to a situation in which they had to deal with complex topics like the current economy. And every single or most or a bigger proportion of the decisions that people took in those ages had a short-term cost and a short-term benefit. So the things that we are instinctively designed to detect are only the short-term consequences. So if you see something that has a short-term benefit, you assume, or it's not that you assume, but you are incapable of seeing the long-term cost or the benefit, because you've only been evolved. We haven't been exposed to this, to a situation in which you had to deal with that for a long term. So we haven't developed the capability of doing that. And I'm making the case that being more humble due to a bigger reasoning of how the economy works and how all the different systems work, like the same thing applies to drugs, to habits, to capitalism versus socialism. There's one way you could go, which is the short-term way, staying home, watching TV, watching porn and masturbating, having short-term benefit, or like having the quick fixes in Tinder. One other example would be taking the drugs. One other example would be socialism. That gives you a short-term benefit, instant benefit. And instinctively, we are designed to see that as the absolute benefit, because we are not capable. It's a complex task to do, to reason about the long-term costs. I'm basically making the case here that reasoning a bit more and thinking about the long-term consequences of our actions, which, as I just said, and I'm repeating myself a bit, it's not something we are developed to, but thinking or reasoning more than we used to do previously, wanting to see the long-term cost, or maybe not wanting because everyone wants to see it, but reasoning that there might be some long-term costs that we're not able to see, and that reasoning a bit more might be beneficial to the long-term functioning of the system is beneficial. And I'm making that case here with my theory, that as we're not evolutionarily developed to see the long-term costs and the benefit, we are biased toward seeking for the short-term benefit. My theory basically says that you are right, because our incapability to see the long-term costs is really correlated with what you said.
That's what's so powerful in human history, though. You see that a lot changed when humans put their faith in intangible ideas, in the intangibility of things that are not necessarily beneficial in the short term. And so I would even say with Western society, it goes back to this crux of a new way of thinking that just wasn't there on Earth before. That we can go historically back and say through Christianity, there is a new way of thinking that came into the world that was intangible. And so you're going from, no, like me, my tribe, and my blood, we have value. but them and their tribe don't have value, to saying, no, because everybody was made by God, we all have value. It's intangible. I can take something intangible, and now because of, in their hearts, they're convicted it's a divine revelation, that God has revealed that all humans are created equal and made in the image of God. Therefore, every individual has rights, and every individual has value, irrespective of the work that they've done in that society, that their human nature has value. That is an intangible idea that has transformed the landscape of justice, of government, of ideas that we are now calling normal. And so it's through the intangibility that we actually can bring things closer to the tangible, to make it more understandable. And
through reasoning, I would say.
Through what?
It's through reasoning about the intangible things.
Mm-hmm.
It's intangible because you haven't reasoned about it. But once you've reasoned about it, you might have a theory to support what you've detected, in which was previously intangible, but you are now tangibly capable of seeing something, which I'm now capable of seeing that socialism is a ruin because of the economic theory. Mm-hmm. It supports my argument, mm-hmm. and I'm not going to make the case for capitalism now, but it's just that, and this applies to any other kind of theory, like the Bible. The Bible is super valuable in terms of internalizing costs and benefits. I will explain a bit more about this. The fact that when you internalize something, it's the fact of doing something which you might have created a long-term benefit, and you are making that person have it now. Like in our current society, people who are, let's say in quotes, altruistic and help others out are in the long term creating more value than the cost that person assumed in the short term. Mm-hmm. And as the long term outcome is positive by the existence of that action in comparison to the inexistence of that action, mm-hmm. we've ended up thinking as a society that potentiating that action, or like incentivizing those people who are capable of doing those actions, or everyone is actually able to help other people out in certain situations. It's not without a criteria that you should help other people out, but in a lot of situations, helping other people out creates much more benefit than cost. And the Bible, or our current society, has got into the conclusion that doing those things is beneficial. And so this is the exact point I talked about in the last episode, that they synthesize the benefits of the Christian religion, of the values that the Christian religion has, without maybe we shouldn't be separating the two, but if I have to do an objective separated from the world evaluation of what the Christian values are, I would say that in a lot of ways it's a joint of knowledge that has been built through trial and error by the exposure of people to a long time, and that has led people to be able to write a text which has a lot of wisdom in it. And the fact of those people having exposed themselves to the human nature through a long time has made them capable of saying, oh, actually, this thing that you made a few years ago that you thought it was a short-term benefit and you thought that there wasn't any kind of long-term cost, there's actually a long-term cost. And we've proved that. And the only way to prove that is exposing yourself to the long-term. That the fact that there's been other people in the past who have already walked this way and have came into the conclusion that there's a lot of things that you would do that aren't correlated with absolute benefit, and that you are able to now read the text and say, according to this text, I shouldn't be doing this thing, I shouldn't be doing this other thing, and I should be doing more this thing, because it's telling you that there's some long-term cost and some long-term benefits that you are not capable of seeing, but it's been shown that they exist. Mm-hmm. And so in terms of making people see things more tangibly, the Bible has a lot of value. But apart from it, I could argue that the value that the Bible has apart from it could be not practical, because the practical value of the Bible might be restrained to, well, not restrained because that's a huge value. Wisdom is the ultimate value, and as the definition I said previously, and if we define wisdom by the capability of us of seeing the long-term cost and the benefits. And if the Bible gives you that, oh man, there's no way something could be more valuable than that. But I'm just trying to make the case that the Bible, in case the Christian religion is the truth, has two kind of values. The practical one, which is the wisdom that it contains, and from the other part, the relationship that you build with God. That it's not, by no means is you are capable of tangibly seeing that, no matter the wisdom you get. But the Bible promises you to have a long-term relationship with Him, and that's probably beneficial if you believe in that. So there's like two kinds of benefits inside of the human religion. What's your point of view?
No, I think that the idea that's kind of Jordan Peterson, Carl Jung kind of like idea of the long-term archetype being developed within like the Bible and these things historically, and how the Bible was created goes against that idea. Because instead what you have historically is these Cambrian explosions of all of a sudden you have the New Testament. And it wasn't changed since then to now. And so you don't have thousands of years of men trying to put their wisdom together. You just have 3 years, everything's done through Jesus. Like a whole 10 years, you have the whole entire New Testament like developing itself in the churches being spread around. Just all of a sudden, like it's just there. And so, like the way that we have received the Bible has a history to it, and it's good to look at that history and see that these are just kind of like explosions, big bangs, and then all of a sudden everything changed.
Wow. So the existence itself of the Bible goes against the theory of evolution, as it hasn't been the Bible.
It hasn't been a slow process of changing this to that. It's just like, bam, Moses, bam, the prophets, bam, Israel, bam, New Testament, Jesus.
But I could make the case of the extreme skeptic, which is that the fact of this sudden bursts of knowledge happening signs a more veridical or more truthful religion. So knowing that, the people who supposedly developed, in case this is fake, the people who supposedly develop the religion evolutionarily, they will be super incentivized to show it as not having been evolutionary, because the fact of it being progressively developed would make the case against the existence of the Bible.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, you just if it's on anybody's interest in their heart to look at it, they can look into the history of it. And the authors of the Bible, they have their own intent, and they tell you what it is. And they have their own perspective. And most of the time, these guys have no idea what's going on. And God is the one doing things that are just way beyond their understanding. So you have unwilling people, ignorant people, that they're not even morally good people a lot of times, and yet God is the one progressing the story through these Cambrian explosions, through these moments of really powerful revelation in a specific moment. Most of these people have no idea what's going on until afterwards. And then you have the Bible and it's like, well, what just happened?
But there's a compatible thesis about this in the real world. Well, not in the real world. Both things could have happened. But in case it was fake, and in case the Christian religion was a fake religion,
which there have been offshoots of the Christian, like with the Gnostic religion and stuff like that, that you can totally see that like there are additions, and there's like there are this fakeness of religion. I don't believe in all religions. Okay. And so it's true. Like we all need to come with skepticism to everything that we think is going to give us a perspective to the intangible, right? And so whether it's a preacher on TV or a person that says that they're wise, you should always have skepticism towards those who say that I understand the intangible, right? Because no, we don't understand the intangible, because we can't see the full spectrum of the future in all of eternity. So I might have my insights on the intangible of where I'm presently seeing things are going, but you should always have skepticism towards anybody who says that they have the perspective on the intangible. Absolutely. And I think that's healthy and necessary to a certain skepticism degree, because if you want to have skepticism, that's good. But if you want to have irrational skepticism that you're unwilling to apply to other areas of your life.
Oh yeah,
and your thinking.
I would say that.
Then I would say that's the point where you've gone too far.
I would say that irrational skepticism, skepticism into everything, absolute skepticism is not rebatable.
Or that you're willing to have absolute skepticism towards one thing, but not to other things.
Oh yeah. So that would be like a cognitive dissonance. You are being hypocritical. You are saying that you see the how do you say it? In the eye of others, but
the speck in your own in your brother's eye, but the log in your own eye. Yeah,
that's it. I didn't remember it. So that's kind of we could detect some hypocrisy in people. I certainly have some hypocrisy, and I think that many people have it. But what I'm saying is that I think that it is actually compatible. All the proofs of validity of the Christian religion and of all the religions with a fake religion. In case, like let's say, the giving the impression that not having evolved but having burst out of nowhere, the knowledge would give you a sense of it being more truthful. The fact that people in the past were able to think about you thinking of it more truthfully because of the characteristics that it had, those people would be more incentivized to modify how the scripts were made in order to make you believe that those things were that way. So that if you are a bit more, if you go one step further in terms of being a skeptic, you'd end up thinking that okay, this is actually compatible with this being not true. But I don't know if you would agree with me, but I think that extreme or absolute skepticism cannot be rebated. You cannot debate an extreme skeptic, because let's say from whatever point I start from, that person could make the exact opposite point. Like let's say I support the theory that the US went into the moon, or like I support the opposite. Someone could say, oh yeah, but how do you know that there's not even a bigger conspiracy going against the thesis that you've got? Sure. Like more things in the scheme of things could be taken into account in order to contradict whatever you were saying.
And that's why there has to be coherence, right? When you have a conversation. Like there's certain things about reality that we have to both accept in order for us to have a coherent conversation.
And what is it?
And that's the thing. Yeah, that basic things like I exist, you exist. Basic things.
But we don't agree in the definition of your existence.
Maybe not on the nature of it, but to say that I exist and I'm conscious and you exist and you're conscious and we can both be here consciously aware of each other.
I cannot agree with that because I'm not able to define precisely consciousness.
Yeah, but you are responding to something right now.
Well, yeah, but...
And that's something saying, I'm here. Now, we presupposed that earlier, but now when it's in the spotlight, we doubt it. But we presuppose it naturally, and that's why we can have a coherent conversation. You speak, I speak. Yeah. Your ideas, my ideas, and so we presuppose that, especially in our culture, where it's a natural thing to presuppose that you are an individual among other individuals, and that is you can doubt that all you want, but we presuppose it naturally, and that's how we have coherent relationships, coherent structure of who I am in society, in this world, gives us a narrative of understanding the world that we live in. You can doubt the narrative, but we're predetermined and predisposed to believe that narrative, function that way, and see the world like that. If we don't, we are not in reality anymore, and we are in a loony bin. And so we can't function in the world, and our brains as well give us that narrative. It gives us a positive reinforcement that narrative is true. Because when you are alone and isolated, you are yearning for that which is the opposite.
The connection.
Yeah. And so our biologically, we respond in a positive reinforcement to that narrative that it is true. And that corresponds with reality. But so there's certain things that we share in order for us to have any kind of coherent relationship. And that's what's so hard, is if you have somebody who's doubting everything to a extreme degree, there's no coherence that you can find any footing to build a conversation on. You can't get anywhere if there's nowhere to go and nowhere that you're coming from. And so that's what's difficult, and that's just chaos. And so we can say, hey, life is not chaos to some degree, and that maybe you wouldn't agree that there's objective truth, but we still believe in in some sort of sense of truth. And I would say there is objective truth, and you still defend something for some reason. Obviously, there's some idea of objective truth that is defendable, and so it's like, okay, we can go somewhere with that basis. And that's like, okay, so that's why we have conversations. But to make skepticism flow over everything, it's just chaos. There's no coherence to anything. And so therefore, it eventually leads to just death, non-existence, nothingness.
Wow. I'm just being capable of seeing one, just for the words you said, I'm being aware of the other benefit that the religion has, that if you try to be ultra rigorous, infinitely rigorous, and have a super infinitely solid grounding for your ideas, and if you wanted to have an infinitely solid grounding for your ideas or for whatever you are starting your point of view from, I think that that's not possible, and you will find yourself in absolute chaos. So the fact of being capable of accepting something without critical thinking, which actually it requires some kind of dogmatic
sort of faith.
Yes, some kind of faith and dogmatic capability of saying, oh, this is true and I don't care, and this is not going to be debated. Like the existence of the truth of the Christian religion is not going to be debated, because that's the basic point, and we've assumed that that's true. This is the point from which we start building. But this thing, the base, is not going to be debated, because there's no way. If you debate that, everything moves. Everything suddenly starts moving, and everything becomes liquid. You cannot build from liquid. You've got to build from something solid, as Bear talked about in one of the previous episodes.
And that's why I come from a place of believing that I think Christianity desires itself to be debated. It calls itself out to be debated in its sense, because it says, because this is objectively true and not just a myth or an idea of abstracts, I thought that because it's objectively true, it invites the world to hit it as hard as it can and desire for it to prove itself and show itself to be true in its nature. But I also believe that all humans have this basis of understanding the world and reality, that everybody's religious, everybody is spiritual, everybody is predetermined to see the world in a certain way, because I believe, in my own view, is that because they were made by God, they have that natural foundation software for being human. The foundation software narrative that exists in all human hearts. It's like human 101. Now you build upon that to be a true human, but it's the human 101 of what is reality and who are we in reality. Not to understand it fully, but to understand the basics of it, so that there's coherence, life, children, family, and future. That you don't have to be a Christian to be a human. You can be a human to be a human, then you can be a Muslim to be a human, and an atheist to be a human, and you still have that basic human 101 software on your hard drive when you're born.
But you cannot debate a debate. You cannot win a debate with an extreme skeptic.
No, because there's no conversation, because there's no coherence.
So we need a point from which to start from.
Exactly.
And that point can be debated in case you were willing to be extremely skeptic. Because there's actually not any kind of base which is absolutely rigorous and it's 100% seen as being solid.
Yeah, so you can always doubt. I mean, it's very easy to do so, and so that's why you have the Enlightenment period in history, and they said, you know what, rationality. We're going to really build on that. That's going to be the thing that we connect ourselves with. But then it's like, well, biologically, we're all just having these chemicals in our brains. And that's what rationality is, just my own personal chemicals versus your personal chemicals. Like, what's objective about that? It's just my own feelings of rationality. And I can put it in my own brain like 2 + 2 = 4, but ultimately it's just my chemicals responding to itself saying. And so in the end, you're just doubting even rationality, logic, understanding that that life is coherent in itself, and you lose your basis.
So I think that we have an extreme bias in terms of judging extraterrestrial life, because we're not capable of seeing other lives existing in terms of not having carbon or water. I'm definitely not capable of saying that.
Sure.
So I think that the same thing applies to this, or like in terms of, we are also biased in terms of seeing other civilizations existing in the universe. In terms of, we think that the conditions by which we are ruled physically are the only ones leading to life, but we are judging that because we are here and we are alive here, and we are biased in terms of we're not able to judge these conditions from outside having these conditions.
Sure.
So we have an anthropocentric bias in terms of. So the same thing applies to this. In terms of, we see that Christian religion exists, we might be part of it in terms of believing in it or not. And I think that if you are just a bit more skeptic, you'd end up coming into the conclusion that the fact that you are here and you are believing in that is because it had some traits in the past that were optimal for reproduction. They might not have been optimal for truth, but they must have been optimal for the reproduction in order to reproduce.
Had to work.
Yeah. So the fact of Christian religion wanting to be confronted by opposing views, I think I could think of now that the only thing making that be the case is that through the Enlightenment period, people forced that to happen. If you weren't open towards different points of view, people would just say, "Oh, that's bullshit." Imagine of all the other religions.
Once again, the history of Christianity is very unique. It's not like Islam. It's not like Buddhism or Hinduism. The history of Christianity is, you have this rejected, considered subhuman, lower class Jewish population, just nothing in the world. And they have this miraculous experience of one of their prophets comes and raises from the dead, and everybody's freaked out. And now they're going to the center of the thinking philosophical world. You have Greeks, the Greek philosophers, the Stoics, and everybody there in all of that part of the world, and the Roman world. And so you have this already established religious world, philosophical world, and you have this obscure Jewish sect that somehow changes the mind of everybody in that whole world through the nature of its truth. And so it had to go against and overcome the heaviest and the strongest of all philosophical and theological perspectives of that time period. And so it's something that was born out of its strength of its truth. And so because of the strength of its truth, it came against all the other truths that existed and overcame them. And that's what's so powerful about that movement, is that this isn't a Roman religion. This is a Jewish religion that overcame the Roman world and through debate, through experience, and through power. So under persecution, under being destroyed, it showed itself that it was still the truest and the most objective.
I wouldn't say the truest, but the most capable of reproducing.
Well, it did overcome paganism itself and the philosophers of that time period, and so that's what's so powerful about it.
But if there was one religion which was more capable of reproducing, in terms of being more capable even than Christianity, let's assume that Christianity is true. I'm not going to make the case against it now. I'm just saying, assuming that Christianity was true, and in case some other religion was more capable of spreading its word, that religion would beat the Christian religion, because the Christian religion, by definition, is less capable.
But we would also see historically that Christian religion, how did it reproduce? It reproduced on its reproduction of ideas. Other religions reproduce on the reproduction of conquering. And so there is a uniqueness to its core when you compare it to whatever's out there in the world right now, in history. And so, maybe there's something new that's coming, and it's a new religion or something like that. Let's compare ideas. Let's compare its correspondence to reality and see if it's true or not. I'm totally open to that. That's massive. That's good.
But I suspect that even if we assume that Christian religion was true, and you gave enough time to people to develop something what was even more capable than Christian religion, because we can agree that the Christian religion is super good at reproducing itself. It's super capable of doing it.
And in the end, there's always the reality that the truth is the truth no matter how many people follow it, right? And so it doesn't matter in the Nazi world how many people were following it. In Germany, it was still not good.
But the fact of...
So the truth is the truth no matter how many people adhere to it. So if the truth is that Odin really is God and we're all wrong about it, then when we die, we're going to get a face full of Odin, and that's going to be pretty bad.
Yeah, but I could argue that the fact of saying that it's just because that thing makes you be more capable of reproducing. It's just a feature which is positive for reproducing. Like, let's say you say, oh no, that's actually not true because of this. No, that thing itself is making that thing more capable of reproducing. So if you are skeptic enough, which I'm partially trying to make the case here, for giving some light to my example against from my hypothetical religion that might come up and be more capable to reproducing. The fact of
secularism.
Yeah, but maybe secularism doesn't have enough capability of reproduction because they aren't optimal for it. But I suspect that if you gave enough time to enough intelligent people, they will end up developing something that is even more capable than Christianity in reproduction.
Once again, though, I'm not talking about utilitarianism of what works and what doesn't work. I'm just talking about what's objectively true or not. And it's just something that claims to be objectively true that we can see if it is or not. But it is something that claims to be true. And it's like it's all the way back to the very beginning of all of this is your thesis on the intangibility and how we're not ready for that biologically in a lot of ways, and how it would be more beneficial for us to be. And maybe we can develop AI that sees into the future at a greater degree than we can, and help us to get the roadmap towards the better long-term results that we should be going on. Maybe that's the handicap that we need, is more technology, more help in that direction. That's all good. Not against technology, but at the same time, it's like, for me personally, I know, like, I can't see the intangible, and yet I benefit from the intangible revealing itself to me through God's word and His truth, because that intangibility gives us a vision for the present moment right now. And I can totally say I have benefited in my life devoted to that intangibility. And that's what's so beautiful about it, is that it's practical, like you said. It's actually useful, even though being utilitarian doesn't reveal its nature of truth. That's definitely one stage of understanding if something's true or not, right? To see if it actually works. If it actually works in reality and it corresponds to reality, that's one stage to knowing that something's true. There's other stages. That's not the only one, but that's one of them, and it's good.
Yeah, but every single thing, like going back to the point of being extremely a skeptic, every point that you gave in order to defend that, okay, I'm not being utilitarian here, I'm just trying to go towards the truth. The fact of doing that is saying that it's giving value to your thesis that Christianity is the true thing. And the fact of doing that is a feature that optimizes for reproduction. So it's going towards utilitarianism in the ultimate state. It's doing that in the objective of it in the last of the consequences, even if you are doing it subconsciously. I could argue, by being absolutely skeptical, that that's the thing happening. Like viruses that are good reproducing, but don't have like a actually truth. There's no truth behind viruses. Viruses is not the way.
They're just really successful at reproducing itself.
Yeah. So I could argue that everything that happens, like for example, my predecessors, they weren't the most intelligent people. They weren't the most beautiful people. They weren't anything. The only thing we've been selected for is for reproduction capability. And I'm not saying that the people who predecessed me were particularly stupid or particularly anything. I'm just saying that this applies to everything, to everyone.
Yeah.
No one, the odds of someone being super far in the distribution of people in terms of anything apart from capability to reproducing is minuscule. There's no way someone could go super far, let's say in IQ. No one has ever got born with 2000 of IQ. Why is it? Because that's not the thing we are focusing on. We are just focusing on reproduction capability, and what's optimal for reproduction is just selecting your partner more pseudo randomly. But if you selected your partner not randomly and you were only selecting it for IQ, you go with the person with the highest IQ. Then the kids would go for the person with the highest IQ they could find. So IQ would be selected. The same thing happens with beauty, maybe. The beauty standards could be changed with time. But I'm saying that the only thing we're looking for is reproduction capability. And the same thing happens, I think, with religion and with all the different ideas. And we're biased in terms of I'm not capable of seeing what the alternative would be if this thing wasn't as capable of reproducing. Because if this thing wasn't able to reproduce,
I wouldn't even know about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are the odds of the truth being as capable of reproducing if you are coming into the conclusion that the exact same thing, which is the truth according to me in economics, which is that libertarianism works, the free markets work, and the intervention of the government in absolute terms doesn't.
But that's definitely not to say that the objectiveness of it shouldn't be understood as true or not true in the end, right?
We cannot know that.
Oh, I believe we can. We can to have the greatest evidence to then make a choice.
Okay, I
think the evidence will always bring us to a good place to say, you're right. Absolute proof to a skeptic, there is no such thing. You can have the video of the resurrection of Jesus, and ultimately you'll just find that to be at fault in some way. So there's no standard of satisfaction, but there is a degree to which we come from and says, okay, with enough evidence, we can make a choice and open up our hearts to see if it's true. And say rationally, it's not irrational to come to that place of making a choice. But then at that point where we're making a choice, that's where we switch from our mind to another aspect of our humanness, which is our faith. And then we place our faith away from ourselves and into something else. And that's terrifying and scary to do that. But it's because we've arrived there with sufficient amount of evidence to make a choice.
We consider
and that evidence is objective. It's not proofs, but it is evidence that's objective.
Yeah. So we've come into the conclusion that we have enough evidence to support the theory we are currently supporting. And we consider that to be objectively true, because the alternative would be to chaos, absolute chaos.
Sure. And
in order to avoid absolute chaos, assuming that something which we don't actually have enough proof to is the absolute truth might be positive and the only rational thing to do. I'm not arguing against it. I'm just saying that if I try to analyze it from a lens of absolute skepticism, everything falls. Yeah, absolutely everything.
For sure.
What if you were a skeptic towards my absolute skepticism? Why are you so skeptic, boy?
Exactly.
Like, why are you being so skeptic about things? Don't you see that the fact of me not being so skeptic makes things work fine? They're working fine. Why would you be a skeptic about this? And you're being a skeptic about the skepticism.
Sure.
So I think that's the way of defeating it, and by making the person pragmatic. Because being absolutely skeptical of everything,
even the skepticism,
and not being pragmatic about the things you are doing, because let's be honest, being absolutely skeptical about everything ends up being useless.
Yeah.
Like I would say, everything is meaningless. Like and
there's only two ways. There's only two routes, right? If you are trying to be an absolute skeptic and be super skeptical to a very high degree of certain things, but then you live your life like normal, as if that wasn't applicable to the rest of your life. That's only a philosophical quandary. It's only a philosophical idea that I put it in a box and I take it out every once in a while to annoy people, and then I put it back in the box and then I live my life as normal. Or if you let it out of the box, you commit suicide.
Yeah.
Because there's literally no other way to handle that chaos.
I agree.
That existential chaos will just eat your soul alive.
I agree. I talked about, I don't know if you've heard the previous episodes, atheism meaning an existential crisis. The previous one, not the previous one. 2 episodes ago.
With Bear, yeah.
And I talked with Bear about exactly this thing, but I could argue that pointing out to personal, you're a hypocrite. I could argue that pointing out to other people hypocrisy doesn't make their theory.
You're right.
False.
It just makes them a bad person to show it off.
But no one cares if that person is a bad person to show. I don't care if that person is being hypocritical or not. I only care about his judgment.
Yeah.
And if his judgment in this situation is that he's extremely a skeptic and I cannot go against it, even if he's not applying that to the rest of his life, because you're true in the terms of if he applies that to everything, he will die. And the fact that him not being dead, he's signaling that he's been a hypocrite. But being hypocrite doesn't mean that you are not
wrong
right.
About it. You're right.
So if we're looking for truth,
it's not. It has to be with working through step by step of the things that are really pertinent to your life and the questions that you're asking.
But this has a lot to do with what Bear said last time. I was talking about the biological limitations we have, and our cognitive capabilities are limited in all terms. And we're limited biologically in all the terms. Like machines are much more capable of doing anything. It's like physical work, processing
information. Yeah.
So our limits, if we could eliminate them, should we? And I made that question in the previous episode, and Bear basically said that there's no reason to do that. Because we don't know what that means, and the fact of thinking about that is not going to make us go into any useful conclusion.
Yeah.
So I was being sort of super skeptic in that situation, but my being super skeptic wasn't going to lead us to any practical solution.
Of it. Yeah.
And we might have to look for practical solutions in the short term, because if we don't, well, death. That might be the reason why we don't see any civilization in the universe, because every single one of them had gone too far in the skeptic pathway, and they didn't assume a level of dogmatism that made them be capable of spreading and existing, and the existence itself might be joined without exception to dogmatism. There must be some kind of dogmatism in the last step to be able to exist.
Yeah, you have to.
And that might be the solution to the Fermi paradox. Fermi was a physicist, and he made the question: if the universe is teeming with aliens, where's everybody? And there's a book about that I read. It's like basically 75 answers for that. And I think that the answer for why we don't see any civilization apart from us, it's a combination of them. It's every single one of them is plausible, but not any single one of them makes the whole reason of us not being able to see.
Sure.
Well, it might do, but I've got no idea. The only thing I say is that we're biased, and that our extreme skepticism in all. I can reason that extreme skepticism leads to death, and the fact of that leading to death makes you want to not to pursue that pathway, because if you do, well.
Yeah, and that's existential reality. Either we are randomly here without anything holding us together in purpose or meaning, and so therefore at the root of everything that we're doing, there is no order. At the root of it, everything is just an illusion of order. Everything's just an illusion of non-chaos.
A simulation.
And so, a simulation, but at the root of it, there is nothing holding reality together. And if we truly let that be a seed that comes into the human consciousness, that unravels everything. And if that's true, then we've built defense mechanisms in our biological nature to go against that. But I don't believe it's true, because I think that the nature of reality points to the opposite direction, and the nature of the human interaction and the human heart and soul goes against that reality of how we just naturally think and work through the world that we live in, and the world that we live in and its nature of what it is. But if it is true like that way, then I don't think we can comprehend how destructive it would be if we really did accept it for what it is.
Infinitely destructive.
Yeah.
Because nothing has meaning.
Because there's no reason, there's no rationality, there's no logic, there's no justice, there's no beauty, there's no morality, ultimately there's just nothing that holds any weight of unity. And that's complete chaos. So to come up with an idea that holds it together, you basically have to come up with your own. You become God. You have to create your own laws. You have to create your own structure. You have to create everything all by yourself. But at the root of it, you're just playing a game by yourself, and it's not really worth anything. But it's the only thing that keeps me from killing myself.
So there's only three options: either you accept a game other people are playing already, Christianity, or two, you build yourself your own game that says that it's worth it to live, or three, you're absolutely skeptic about everything, even if you're...
But I think the most common thing that people do, and there's a movie that I love called Children of Men. It's my favorite movie, Children of Men. And it's this post-apocalyptic world. People can't have babies anymore, and it's this one guy. He's trying to figure out a way to smuggle this person into this other place, and he basically has this really rich person in his family to help him, and the whole world's falling apart, and he just looks at this really rich guy, and it's like, how do you do it? How do you keep on going day to day, just living your life? You know that the whole world's coming to an end. There's nothing stopping it, and yet you're still just living your life, and your thing is like, I just don't think about it. And I think that most people just live like that. Just enjoy what's in front of you, like you said, the short-term cost benefit, and just enjoy what's in front of you. Enjoy it. Enjoy your friends. Enjoy your family. Enjoy the sunset. Enjoy the narrative that's there, but don't think about it too much, because if you do, you either have to submit yourself to God or go crazy. And both those are seemingly extremes. I would say the submit to God is more aligned with reality, but it's like you have three options. Just don't think about it. Live your life, be quiet, and enjoy what's going on without looking at who's behind the curtain.
So that's basically an explanation of the survival bias. The fact that I'm alive is because I've been able to not think about this. Because in the moment you think about it,
your life's going to change.
Yeah, so that's like... Normally, survival bias is not explained because you don't see people who weren't able to reproduce. Yeah. So you are not getting... there's no one out there saying, my parents weren't able to reproduce, so I'm not here.
Exactly.
I
wish they did, but
I'm not here, actually. Yeah. So we've got a huge bias of people who weren't able to reproduce. So that film, by showing that the huge survival bias, is super interesting, and I'm now interested in watching it.
It's really good.
Yeah. So the alternative would be to go crazy, or to like the fact of he being able to exist more in terms of having more wealth was only permitted by his non-thinking of what the outcome could be. Sure. Because I think that both outcomes of thinking about it are equally plausible. Well, I would say that the extreme skepticism is even more plausible, because there's no way you can reason against that. There's no rational thing I cannot reason out of extreme skepticism. There's no way I could do that. Yeah. Maybe because of mental limitations, I couldn't reason against Christian religion because it's too complex for me with my limited mental capability to go against it. So I might be limited. I might have, from my point of view, both of them might be infinitely complex. They aren't. One of them, I guess that it is, and the other one it's not. But from my point of view, both of them are proper, are as real, and I'm not capable of of distinguishing.
And I would say both of them similarly will drastically change your life, and you will experience it in your human experience and consciousness, the reality of both of them if you go towards it. So if you go towards that one of nihilism, basically, then you will start to feel that, and it'll affect every part of your life if you truly accept it and work it through. And you can try to have positive nihilism, but in the end, the existential crisis will be there. Likely, other side as well, if it's true in its nature, then it will also interact with you on a powerful level that will change everything. But both of them will be experiential. And I would say that the one with God will be experiential once we give our hearts up to it and work through it. It's not just a game of logic and mind. It's also experiential as well. Just as experiential as the chaos that you could extreme on the extreme end. But both have supernatural forces to it, I would say.
I see a correlation here with quantum physics. Mm-hmm. I'm not an expert by no means about quantum physics, but from the things I've read and I've heard about, I think that from a point of view which is not absolutely knowledgeable of things, you could see two things to be simultaneously true, like the double helix experiment. Well, how is it possible to this thing that it's coming out of this other thing to be simultaneously in two places, and in the moment I measure it, changes, and it decides its position, but it's overpositioned in the previous to be measured. That blows my mind. But it only blows my mind because I lack knowledge.
Exactly.
And in the moment I had enough knowledge, one of the options would fall. Or maybe not one of the two options I'm handling, but a third option would come and would say, oh, this is actually the truth. The thing happening and making this thing is explained by this thing. And I'm now not capable of explaining how quantum physics works, but because I know enough about it.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that the same thing applies to this, because from a point of view of relative unknowledgeableness, because I'm not absolutely knowledgeableness, I see both of the things being possibly true. Christianity or absolute skepticism, or maybe other religions too. Like they're simultaneously capable of, or possibilities of being true. And that thing, because of me not being able to judge this properly and know enough about the nature of this simultaneous overposition, it blows my mind. But
I would say though that even though we lack understanding, the law of non-contradiction is still at play.
The law, excuse me?
The law of non-contradiction is still at play. So even though I lack full knowledge, ultimately, something is either true or it's not true in reality, non-dependent upon my understanding of that thing. And so outside of my objectiveness or perspective of that, outside of my subjective conclusions, are the reality of that it's true or it's not true. Things are either exists or it doesn't exist outside of my perspective of it. And so I would say that the law of non-contradiction is still applicable to however far you push the envelope.
I think it doesn't, because the extreme skeptic would argue against that. And he would be a skeptic towards the law of non-contradiction, and he would say, well, simultaneous truth can exist, and they can seemingly be contradictory, but still be simultaneously existent. So if he argues against that, there's nothing I can say.
I believe that there's still, to clarify, I still think that in that definition, you would say that it's because you lack information. That's why you don't. I'm saying outside of the information that we have, the full exhaustibleness of things that are true or not true, they just are or they aren't. And so I can lie, and that's going to be that which is fully true or fully not true. And so I can just completely make up a complete nothing lie, and it can be either fully true or not true in its nature. You will never know. But outside of myself, this table either fully exists or it doesn't exist. There are particles here or there's not. And that is true objectively outside of my perspective of it. And so ultimately, reality itself, if we want to have any correspondence with coherence, we would have to determine that things can be true and things cannot be true. And they can't be not true and true at the same exact time. Like they can't say that God doesn't exist, completely, exhaustively doesn't exist, and exists at the very same moment.
How do you explain the double helix experiment?
I would say that we just lack the map of understanding how things work.
So with an expectation of having more knowledge in the future, that knowledge will give an explanation to this, you are choosing to, okay, there's something which might break my thesis if the outcome of this is that my thesis is not correct. But with more knowledge, I could end up thinking that this thing actually...
Without going to crazy skepticism, say, I'll never be able to know anything. With saying, hey, where we're at right now, we can make choices. I can make choices that are rational and are able to go in a good direction. I could have that over skepticism and say, oh, but how much I don't know about so much that I'll come to a place of not believing anything in the end because I have skepticism towards everything. I would say it's okay to limit ourselves. And it's okay to bring ourselves to a place of saying that this is with the information that I do have, with the world that I do live in, with the coherence that we do share, that this is not an irrational thing to pursue.
Yeah, so I agree, but that doesn't show that the other thing is false. It just shows that your positioning is the only
with the information that I have
is the only practical way.
It can be a practical thing to say, man, this ice cream is not, no matter how much I doubt it, I can enjoy it. I can jump over the doubt and enjoy the ice cream if I choose to say, though I can put layers and layers and layers and layers of skepticism on this and say that this is worm guts and this is all this or that, whatever. I don't know what they did in the back. They spit in it. Oh no, they put all these things. Okay, shh. I can come to the conclusion of saying I can enjoy this ice cream without being in an existential crisis.
Constantly.
Yeah.
So I talked about this with Bear, that even if you come into the conclusion that extreme skepticism is the true thing, the fact of you not knowing right now that future developments in science or in technology will give you the absolute truth in terms of whatever, and the fact of me not being able to cognitively process enough information simultaneously to argue against Christian faith makes me think that there is a possibility, even parting from the extreme skepticism, there is a possibility from my point of ignorance of Christianity, one, being true, and two, in the future, super far, or maybe not that far, point in which sufficient technology has been developed to absolute truth to be shown, and so that meaning to emerge. Even though I can reason that there's no meaning now, I can reason that with sufficient technology that we currently don't have, we can actually find the meaning in the future. And in finance, when you expect someone to not pay, you assume that he hasn't paid instantly. Now, he's not paying in 1 year. But you are discounting that. If I could define the markets in one way, I would define the markets like constant discounting of things. If you expect something to happen, you assume that thing happened right now, assuming there's 0% interest rate.
Sure.
So, but
I would only add that if there is such a thing as a omnipotent, loving creator out there, and he's a person, then the individual who connects with that person, I would say he has the technology to bring that revelation of the truth to the individual.
Yeah, if there is,
and that would be an affirmation to the questions, to the doubts, to all these things. So it's like in the end, I believe in a foolish idea in comparison to the world, because the world wants absolute certainty, but I come with a belief in a dead Jew on a cross that rose from the dead. Why? Oh, because I see that it has evidence towards it, but also because there is a supernatural interaction with that absolute truth being that has revealed itself to me personally to have that relationship to say, oh, that's also an objective experience. And so I balance both of them to really see how good it is. It's not just a facts issue. It's also a relationship issue. That's what's so weird about it, is that it's a supernatural relationship experience too. And that's what I think would lack in the other, because the other one is just all in the mind, all in my mind. And it's just a game in my mind, and I have nothing else to interact with that except for the game in my own mind. And ultimately, it's saying, I'm the one that has a standard of truth. I'm the one that can determine whether things are rational or not rational. But I think that's flawed in its nature. To think that I should ever be in that position of being the one to determine what's rational and irrational.
But if you shouldn't be in the position to judging if something should be rational or irrational, no one should ever think that they are in the position to judge that. And if no one ever was able to make the judgment, we wouldn't have the things we have now. We will probably.
I agree. We skip over that naturally and easily.
You'll probably be dead now. Because
absolutely. I agree. I'm just saying, if we really believed in the things that we're doing. So we functionally live in ways that we don't think about. But if we really saw how we're living and why we're living, we should really take a step back and be like, well, why do I trust myself so much?
Well, yeah, if you are absolutely rigorous, or if you want to be, you would stop doing the things you are doing and you would do other things.
Sure.
Because you are actually not being absolutely rigorous, but because being absolutely rigorous means doing some things which are not compatible with the life you had previously. And maybe not being rigorous is actually rigorous in terms of maximizing the thing that you are currently doing. If I wanted to be rigorous, I would have to stop doing the judgments maybe, or I would have to do something else. So in order to do that, stop doing the things I'm doing, and by doing that, I would stop having the life I have that I value. And by me valuing it, I'm valuing not being rigorous. And I might be hypocritical now, but who cares if I'm hypocritical if I'm actually maximizing the odds of me existing by being a hypocrite.
Sure.
And if, yeah.
No, there's a fun question, because there's a fun question for you. So if AI can come to a place where it can predict the market, what will happen to the market?
The market would have already discounted, how the market would have to judge the AI as giving the truth. If everyone absolutely agrees with the AI in terms of his judgment being the true, everyone would instantly discount everything that the AI says. And so let's say the AI says that Tesla should be valued in zero, and so Tesla goes to zero, and so even if the AI hypothetically is wrong, the fact of everyone absolutely trusting that thing to be true would create a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if Tesla's stock is valued in zero, and no one ever buys a Tesla stock because everyone believes that it should be valued in zero, as the AI said, the self-fulfilling prophecy, even
they'll sell stock,
Tesla will be valued zero.
Yeah.
So Tesla will not be able to finance itself because it's not able to access the market, because no one trusts it, because
nobody makes choices that are of themselves anymore. Now they're making choices only dependent upon what the AI predicts,
and because there's only one way of going. Because everyone absolutely, because if there's
it destroys the nature of the market, which is random people investing in different places based upon their outlooks of how they feel.
No, I think that the long-term way of the market is the truth, but there's some irrationality that makes self-fulfilling prophecies to exist. Like let's say I judge Tesla irrationally towards a value that it's not, and then the fact of me doing that judgment might be affecting it to go that way.
Okay.
So the AI, if it is 100% trusted by people, it will end up being the thing that the AI said, even if we could argue that actually, let's say that posterior to that thing happening, we can reason that it wasn't actually true, but because of that happening and that being so trusted, it happened.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, I forgot to talk about the case in which the AI actually was efficient at predicting the future and in allocating the resources. So in case this happened and the AI was super efficient, 100% of efficiency will be acquired in the market. If the AI wasn't trusted by people, but the AI had 100% of the truth in itself, it will be able to gain an infinite amount of resources in a super short period of time. If when a stock is going up, you invest up, and when in the exact same moment in which it's going to start going down, you invest downwards, your net worth will skyrocket. That's an absurdly efficient way of increasing your net worth. And also, if this happened, the efficiency of the capital allocation of society would increase so much that the GDP of the United States could go into 40 trillion in like less than 1 year. 100% growth in every year for the rest of the history, because I don't know why 100% would be the limit. It could actually be 1,000,000% per day if an infinite amount of efficiency would be acquired. But yeah, capital allocation is a super hard thing to do, and if the AI was 100% efficient doing that, well, absolute prosperity for everyone and forever.
How far away do you think we are until AI can predict things like that?
Oh, in terms of technological capability of doing it, I've got no idea.
Yeah.
But I guess that will instantly happen in the moment that we develop an AI that is more capable of programming than humans. Because in the moment you program something that is more capable than you to program, that thing will program a better programming.
Yeah.
So it's an explosion to infinity of knowledge, and it will just explode. The limit would be physical resources. That's the bottleneck, because you are not capable of computing absolutely everything. Even the Bitcoin network, which is the biggest processing network ever, is not capable of processing an infinite amount of processing demand. But the fact of that system having a limited amount of hardware to process the thing will be capable of optimizing itself to infinity in terms of limited size. So even with a super small amount of processing hardware, the fact of it being capable of improving itself with the same amount of hardware, I guess that it will be able to develop itself into requiring even less hardware, because it optimizes itself faster than the previous than the previous way. So the intelligence could explode without needing an explosion of hardware, and this blows my mind. And the moment in which that happens, I'm not able to do that prediction. I don't know. I wish. If I had to say what I wish it happened, I guess I would have to assume a risk in order to that to happen. And in the moment that happens, I don't know if that would suppose an existential crisis. So I guess that if that had to happen, I would want that to happen a few days previous to my death.
Yeah, to see what. Because it's still not as efficient as the human mechanism of the brain. All the supercomputers. That's what's so powerful.
Our brains are not efficient at all. Well, they are efficient partially, because if they wouldn't process anything at all. But they are.
Just the bandwidth from our optical nerve to our brain and processing that information.
It's 99.999% compressed.
It's incredible. It's incredible how fast and powerful it is.
But it's actually...
This is all fluid bandwidth. Computers haven't reached that yet.
Yeah, I don't know the exact definition, the exact resolution of the thing we're seeing, but I think that it's only 3% of the range of that we actually see in high definition, in high resolution, and the rest of it's just blurred. But because of you being capable of moving your eyes constantly, like 3 times per second, that gives the impression that it's actually But I'm going off the example. I was just saying that I want AI to exist 3 days, or like let's say enough time previous to my death, so in case it's not an existential crisis,
maybe
it gives me infinite lifetime. But in case it is an existential crisis, I only pay with 3 or the minimum amount of time I had left.
Gotcha. All right, thank you, man. So good to talk to you.
So thank you very much, Emilio, for coming today.
I'm so grateful for you. Thank you, Alex.
And it's been a pleasure, and I hope we are capable of doing any other talk in the future.
Sounds good. I love it.
Stay tuned.